What's up, everyone? Welcome back. I cannot believe it, but September is just a few short days away, and you know what that means. Halloween Horror Nights is right around the corner, and we are so stoked. We cannot wait to be there. So in this video, just as I did last year, I'm going to be ranking my most anticipated houses and scare zones of Halloween Horror Nights 2022. Halloween Horror Nights 31 runs for a record 43 nights, I believe, from September 2nd to October 31st. Olivia and I are so excited to be heading down. We've got our Rush of Fear passes already and are scheduled to be there for the third week of September for multiple nights. So make sure you hit that subscribe button and you have your notifications turned on, because I'm gonna have plenty of content coming, not just from Horror Nights, but from plenty of other Halloween events this fall. So for this ranking, I'm gonna be ranking the houses in order of the ones that I'm least excited about to the ones that I'm most anticipating and the ones that I'm most stoked about. So without further ado, let's jump into it. Starting off at number 10, I have the Horrors of Blumhouse. Now this is maybe the third or fourth incarnation that they've done of a Blumhouse Productions maze, and I've just not really been impressed by them in the past. So typically in the Blumhouse maze, they feature two recent films that have been released, and this year's edition is featuring Black Phone and Freaky. The mashup of two films is always chaotic. It's typically hard to follow the story. I have yet to see Freaky, but we did just watch Black Phone recently, and we thought it was a great movie. I just am having a hard time understanding how it's going to translate to a maze. I feel like the movie was set in maybe 2 or 3 different locations, so I don't really know how they're gonna pull that off. So we'll see. This is one I'm not super excited about, but maybe I'll shoot up my rankings and I'll be pleasantly surprised. At number 9, I have Bugs Eaten Alive. Now this is a Universal original house that I think a lot of people are terrified of. I think this house has a lot of potential to move up throughout the run, but just off the bat, I'm not that spooked by bugs as some other people are. I know, the majority of folks are terrified by bugs and are pretty much just freaked out by just this overall theme. So I've seen a lot of people that are just staying away from this house completely, but I don't really fall into that camp. So we'll see. I'm hoping that Universal pulls off something awesome here, but at the moment, again, it's kind of towards the bottom of my list. Coming in at number 8 is Fiesta de Chupacabras. Now this is another theme that doesn't really stand out to me. It doesn't really freak me out like some of the other original ideas that they have for this year's run. Again, this is another house that I think can shoot up my rankings as the season progresses, but just off the jump, it's not something that I'm tremendously excited about. I feel like the Chupacabra is not even that scary of a creature. From all the pictures and images I've seen, it's more of like a smaller type, almost like a rodent or like a mouse looking thing. I could be completely off on that, and I know Universal is gonna make it terrifying. I do think the Day of the Dead element could be really cool, and I'm interested to see how Universal plays into that piece a little bit. I'm just thinking of like the imagery and some of the scenery you could see associated with that theming is really cool. My number 7 most anticipated house is The Weekend After Hours Nightmare. I'm a lot more bullish on this house than most people seem to be. I really think this one could be good. I've seen pretty much all of the source material that the house will be referencing, and I definitely can see it working. Even though I'm not the biggest fan of The Weeknd, I do think his music is good and it's catchy. But I just think this house will be kind of a cool and different experience to just break up a little bit of the routineness that we see at Horror Nights. So I'm pretty excited about this one, honestly. At number 6, I have Hellblock Horror. Now this is another Universal original house that I think can be really good. I know in the past Universal's done really well with like prison and dungeon themed houses. At least to me, the prison theme is tremendously spooky and creepy to begin with. So I think just going in with that vibe, I'm thinking it's gonna be pretty good. But we'll see how Universal Creative takes this one. Like I said, it's kind of right in the middle of my list, and it could go one of 2 ways here. But I'm cautiously optimistic about this one, and it's in a pretty prominent location, so it better be good, Universal. On to number 5, I have Universal Monsters Legends Collide. This is the 3rd consecutive year the event has featured a Universal Monsters house, and as far as I'm concerned, they can keep them coming pretty much every year. Nothing to me screams HHN and Universal more than these classic monsters, and the 2 previous versions of this maze have been absolutely incredible, so I'm expecting nothing less from this year's edition. Coming up to number 4, I have Spirits of the Coven. This is another classic Universal Halloween theme. I think they can really knock this one out of the park. I love anything witch related, anything, classic horror related, so this is right up my alley. hearing the word coven in this title kind of brings me back to the third season of American Horror Story, which was the Coven season, which was my favorite personally. Although maybe not the scariest, I think the potential imagery that they can use in a house like this could be awesome. And I'm really jazzed to see, you know, what Universal does with a theme like this. I think it's going to be really picturesque and, you know, one of the better houses. I think it's gonna be a sleeper hit for a lot of people. On to my third most anticipated house. I have this year's edition of Halloween. And I say this year's edition because Horror Nights has had this exact house, I think back in 2014. It was actually a fan favorite, so I'm really stoked to see it returning. It's actually my favorite horror and Halloween movie of all time, not just of the series, but actual Halloween movies. So I'm really stoked to see it for the first time. They've done sequels in the past that I've seen. I think I've seen the Halloween 4 house and maybe the Halloween 2 house. But this one takes it all the way back to the beginning, so that gets me really hype. I know the Michael Myers scare, you know, just as the Leatherface chainsaw and things like that, it can get kind of redundant. So I'm excited to see what Universal does here. I hope they get really creative and really just, you know, take this one to the next level. Moving to my second most anticipated house of 2022, I have Descendants of Destruction. To be honest, it's really the backstory and kind of the theme and imagery that gets me most excited about this house. They're actually making some comparisons to 2019's Dead Exposure Patient Zero house, which I thought was really good. In particular, that one scene where you're in the rail car and the zombies are moving closer and closer to you, and there's scares on either side. They pulled that one off really well, and that one kind of sticks out in my head from that year. But I think this one can be really good. As you can kind of tell from my rankings here, I do tend to skew towards the Universal originals versus the intellectual property houses. I think Universal just really takes the originals to a completely different level. And although I do appreciate, you know, seeing movies and things like that recreated in the parks, I think it's the originals where this event really shines. So this is one that I think is really going to be tops on a lot of people's list. And finally, my most anticipated house of HHN 31 is Dead Man's Pier Winter's Wake. I absolutely loved this scare zone when it first made an appearance back in 2017 as Dead Man's Wharf. I just thought the set design that they had, I thought the monsters, the creatures that they have, the hook hand fishermen, for whatever reason, that is just terrifying to me. I think that in conjunction with it also reminds me of 2017's Dead Waters, which was an extremely picturesque house. I think, you know, some of the imagery in there is gonna be similar to what we'll see here. And then finally, I think it's also gonna tie in, you know, the winter portion. So I'm thinking about like 2019's Yeti, where it has snow falling and other, you know, winter portions in there. The air conditioning is cranked down to really get you in the mood. So I think this house is going to be a deadly combination of all these three that I just mentioned, and I'm absolutely here for it. I cannot wait, and I think this is going to be the house of the year. So that does it for the houses. Let's quickly jump over to the scare zones and start that ranking. So starting at number 5, I have Conjure the Dark. And this one I'm putting in this area mainly just because of the location that it's in. It's in that San Francisco area of the park, which other than Dead Man's Wharf back in 2016, which I just mentioned, they've had some trouble with the zone. And actually, now that I think of it, the Rob Zombie zone was there, so that wasn't a good one as well. But anywho, other than those two, this area has kind of suffered in recent years, and I'm interested to see what they do. I think this theme could be good. It's got me intrigued a little bit, but as of right now, this is kind of at the bottom of my list. Coming in at number 4, I have Horrors of Halloween. Now this one, again, is kind of ranked lower just by the fault of where it's located. It's right at the front of the park where it's heavily congested. It's right where everyone enters, so there's really a lot of action going on there. But I've seen some of the set pieces they already have going in here, and it looks really cool. I think it will be a good way to kick the event off. They have, you know, different portions from each scare zone throughout the park in this first scare zone. So I think it would be a good way to get, you know, people warmed up and into the event. I've also seen they have the Pumpkin Lord set up right out front from last year's Wicked Growth House, which will be really cool to see return as well. So I think it will just be an awesome way to kick off the event for everyone. My third ranked scare zone for this year's Horror Nights is Sweet Revenge. This is in the New York section of the park. And typically the scare zones in this area are pretty good. They have a lot of room to work with here, so a lot of times the set pieces are a lot larger. There's usually some good crowd interaction. I think the theme for this one is pretty solid. It's kind of going back to that you know, typical Halloween vibe with candy, mutant children, all that good stuff. I think it's gonna be really freaky, so I'm excited about this one. My second most anticipated scare zone for 2022 is Graveyard Deadly Unrest. Now, this scare zone is slotted for the Hollywood section of the park, and this is another one I've seen quite a few pictures of the set items that they already have in place, and it does look really good. I think the graveyard idea is a little strange in a Hollywood street setting, so I'm interested to see how that plays out once, you know, the sun goes down and the lights come on. This zone is supposed to be themed and set during a thunderstorm, so that alone has, you know, kind of wheels turning, get me excited for the lighting and sound effects they can be using. So I think this one will be really good. And finally, my most anticipated scare zone of Halloween Horror Nights 31 is Scarecrow Cursed Soil. Part of this ranking, again, is the location in which the scare zone is. It's in the Central Park area of Universal Studios, so this is a prime area for a scare zone. It's always dark, the lighting and sound effects are always really creepy. This was also a theme that they've used in years past. Back in 2017, this was actually my all-time favorite Horror Nights house. It was called Scarecrow the Reaping. It's been touted as one of the most terrifying houses that Horror Nights has ever made, and I would not disagree with that. So I'm really hoping this scare zone lives up to the hype of that original house. I don't think it's gonna be just as good, but I think the premise is there, and I'm really excited to see how Universal translates this to a zone. In terms of the two shows, I thought the premiere of the Lagoon show 2 years back was really good. And even though it was still good last year, it did kind of take a step back and wasn't as entertaining. So I'm excited to see where they take it this year, hopefully bring it back to prominence. I think this year's edition is called Ghoulish, so I'm really excited to see that. So on the flip side, Halloween Nightmare Fuel absolutely blew my mind last year. I was not expecting that in the slightest. The music, the actors they had, they were so talented, it was so entertaining, and I thought it was a perfect fit for Halloween Horror Nights, so I'm really stoked to see them back this year. Like I said, I think it was actually maybe my favorite part of the event last year, so I can't wait. I know we're gonna see multiple shows again this year. So that's it. Thanks for running through the list with me. As usual, I think this year's event has some tremendous potential. I really like the classic Halloween theme that they're playing into with the 31st year, you know, 31 days in October, Halloween beyond the 31st, all that good stuff. So I think it's right in their wheelhouse. I think they can really do some amazing things with it. So I'm so excited to get down there. I'm also not terribly upset that there's more original houses versus IP or intellectual property houses. As I said, I do enjoy walking through some of my favorite movies or TV shows, but I think Universal really thrives with their original houses. The amount of energy and creativity that goes into them is really just what I think Horror Nights is all about. So those are the ones I'm really most stoked for. I will say there was one IP that I will not mention that I was particularly excited about seeing this year that we have seen in years past. I think you can insinuate which one that is. Hopefully they can get that rectified and bring it back for, you know, future years. But anywho, I'm excited for the lineup that we do have, and like I said, I cannot wait to get down there. With that, I'm gonna wrap it up. Feel free to drop me a comment below if you have any differing opinions on the houses or scare zones this year. I'd love to hear from you. If you wouldn't mind liking this video and hitting the subscribe button, I'm gonna have plenty more content coming out, just as I said, you know, not just from Horror Nights, but also from, we're going to Not So Scary for a night. We're doing Howl-O-Scream at SeaWorld Orlando. We're gonna be doing Howl-O-Scream up here in Williamsburg, so we'll be all over the place. So make sure you're following along so you're not missing any of the action. That's gonna do it for today though. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the fog.